Hey everyone, I'm Patrick Shaw and you are watching Off the Rails TCG. Today is going to be the start of a video series called the Ninja Assassin Project. Ninjas and assassins are my favorite classes in Flesh and Blood, and recently both have seen an uptick in relevance with the release of Outsiders. This series will take a look at the different individual heroes and the various formats that comprise both the ninja and assassin classes. Part 1 is going to start off where it always starts off, and that's with Katsu. Katsu has been around since the very first set of the game and has ebbed and flowed throughout the years and where he stood in the meta. Starting off as a very control-heavy hero, Katsu has only gotten more and more aggressive over time. Before Outsiders, Katsu is a fairly aggressive deck that required a lot of setup by its pilot in order to hit optimal turns, and worse, those turns were often telegraphed so hard that a good defending opponent knew exactly where to block to shut down even the most powerful turns. Now, though, Katsu has gotten a series of cards that have changed the nature of how Katsu runs. Today, we're going to look at what Katsu looks like in Outsiders, explore the combo then and now, and we'll wrap up by breaking down some of the more common lines you're likely to see on the board and how they work from both an offensive and defensive perspective. Stick around. All right, everybody, we're back and we're going to take a look at Katsu fundamentals using old-fashioned Katsu as the core here. It is the Katsu that is solely based on not solely, but mostly based on the original Surging Strike combo line. So that full line looks like Surging Strike, Whelming Gust Wave, Megenchi Release, and ending with Lord of Wind. Now, outside of the pieces of this combo, the rest of the deck was basically generic good stuff like Enlightened Strike, Snatch, things like Razor Reflex for obvious reasons on the Kadachi lock and how much it enables. But other than that, you may run some other combos like the leg tap line, but those combos didn't interact well with each other. So your turns could be very easily messed up if you had the wrong pieces of the wrong combos at the wrong time. For the most part, Katsu's entire game plan is hit your opponent, use Katsu's ability to tutor out a missing piece of the combo, and chain these attacks together so that they can deal the most amount of damage, draw cards, and overwhelm your opponent with tempo. This really is one of the core strategies of Katsu. And because of that, your lines are easily telegraphed, and if someone knows what they're doing, effective blocking can really stifle your turn. So let's just examine this line and some of the nuances of how this line works and what the offensive and defensive perspective might look like. So we're going to use this as kind of an example of executing the combo, and we'll talk about the individual pieces as we go. So this is pretty much the nuts right here. You have all 4 pieces and a blue in hand. Let's just start at the beginning of the combo line. Surging Strike, pitching a blue, floating 1. Surging Strike's it's a 2-cost 5 for 2 with Go Again. It is the combo starter of the Lord of Wind line. Now, whenever I attack with the first attack action, there's only 2 possible outcomes from here. The attack action either hits or it does not hit. If it hits, I can activate Katsu, which means that I can search for the next piece if I don't have it in hand. Defensively, I have to begin weighing those options out. How many cards do I have in hand? What are the ramifications of allowing this to hit? How much better does their turn get? Now, what goes into making a decision like that? You have to have an idea of what is in their deck that could help Surging Strike get boosted. From Katsu's offensive perspective, the 2 best things that you can do as the defending opponent is not block, or I guess 3 things. Is not block, underblock, or block for exactly 5. Now, as I said, to understand your decision on how to block, you have to understand different possible ways that the Katsu player can buff the Surging Strike in order to get the hit. So let's take a look at some of the ways that people might try to buff Surging Strike. Lunging Press. Lunging Press was popular a while ago. Crucible rare or common, depending on where you found it. But it simply says it's a 0-cost blue pit, which is fantastic for Katsu. It says a target attack action card gets +1. No other conditions. It's a generic attack reaction, which means that it can buff Surging Strike no problem. It can also buff any other attack action that you have, like Command and Conquer or something like that. Next up, Art of War. Art of War's modes that we generally choose are the attack action cards get +1 attack and defense this turn, and banish an attack action card from my hand and draw 2 cards. But that first mode, attack action cards you control get +1 attack and defense this turn, does apply to Surging Strike, and if you play it in the reaction phase, you will get the buff and it will get the +1 to become 6. Ancestral Empowerment. Ancestral Empowerment is a ninja attack reaction. Says target ninja attack action gets +1 attack, draw a card. And it applies to Surging Strike like everything else. One of the newest additions, Concealed Blade, is a hybrid assassin ninja attack reaction from Outsiders. It says target assassin or ninja attack action card gets +1 attack, and when this hits, equip a dagger from your inventory. Now, there are some maniacs out there running around with flick knives. I fully support them. We're not in our build, but if you were and you had an extra dagger in the sideboard, this would come in twofold, because it would add an additional on hit, not just Katsu, assuming this is the first attack action, but can also replace a flicked dagger. Now, last but not least, it is a 2-cost, which means you can pummel it. I personally don't agree with pummel in Katsu. There are some people out there that swear by it and run 1 or 2 copies, more for the psychological effect than anything else, but no one really prepares for the pummel on Surging Strike. So what can't buff it? Razor Reflex, because it is a 2-cost, not a 1-cost. And Breaking Scales, because it does not have combo. When trying to decide how or if to block Surging Strike, having a good understanding of the possible ways it can be buffed will help you make that decision. As the general rule of thumb, right? People aren't going to generally run pummels. If you see pummels because you scouted it out, and if you can play to respect the pummel, all the power to you. Just about everything else played by themselves can buff it by 1 to make it 6 attack. So given all the different possible ways that it can be buffed, we can reasonably expect that a Katsu player can buff it at least 1 to 6. We cannot reasonably expect that they would have additional buffs every time unless there's something very telegraphed in that period. So the most straightforward way to stop Surging Strike as the first attack action from triggering Katsu is to block 6. Now, if the defender has successfully blocked the Surging Strike, Katsu's hand configuration really determines the next course of action. Now, if the hand has the natural combo piece in it, then, this part doesn't necessarily matter because we can just play the next piece out. But if we don't have that next piece, naturally, our lives become considerably more difficult. So you can see in this scenario with Megenchi and Arsenal that by blocking Surging Strike, you've prevented me from discarding a 0-cost and finding a card with combo, which would likely be the Red Whelming Gustwave. And so the complexion of my turn becomes vastly different, where I would be able to do a Whelming into Megenchi. So instead of that long turn threatening masks and things like that, I now have to figure out how to salvage my turn, right? So especially if it's something like this with the E-strike in hand. I don't want to burn the Megenchi and waste it by putting it up there. So I am like the most likely scenario here is to perhaps Kadachi and then end right with a powerful E-strike for 7, which is still damage, but it's just damage. You can see just how different our turn can be, whether I've naturally drawn the combo versus having to find the combo. And so stifling something like Surging Strike becomes a very powerful tool in the fight against Katsu. All right, let's look at a world where I do in fact have the Whelming Gust Wave in hand and can play it after Surging Strike after my opponent has blocked 6. Now Whelming Gust Wave is coming in for 4, right? So it has combo. Combo says, if Surging Strike was the last attack in the combat chain, Whelming Gust Wave gains +1, go again, and if this hits, draw a card. Now, Whelming Gust Wave, whether or not Whelming Gust Wave has come in after Surging Strike is very important. In a scenario where Whelming Gust Wave is by itself for some reason, or the first attack action, it is not going to get buffed naturally. It's not getting buffed by the combo, so it would come in for 3, and it does not naturally have go again. Now, if I attack simply with the Whelming Gust Wave without having a Surging Strike in front of it, odds are that I have a way to give it go again. Either with something like the boots, either this or Snapdragon Scalers, or Razor Reflex. In addition to Razor Reflex, all the other previous cards that we talked about, Lunging Press, Art of War, Ancestral Empowerment, Concealed Blade, can also buff it by 1. In addition, Breaking Scales can target Whelming Gust Wave to give it +1 as well. Now, if the combat chain has gotten to Whelming Gust Wave, there are a lot of factors to consider when talking about how to defend. So as the Katsu player, I'm attacking with this, knowing that it's at a break point and I want the draw. Now, there are a lot of nuances on whether or not this continues even beyond this point. And it all depends on what's happening surrounding it. Now, I've led with the example here of having the natural combo. I have Megenchi Release in Arsenal. So whether or not this hits, it's going to have go again, and I'm going to be threatening another attack. Now, as we talked about, the Lord of Wind combo ends with the potential for a powerful Lord of Wind attack. But the Lord of Wind attack can only get buffed if it has legal targets in the graveyard. So, what does that mean? That means very early in the game, this isn't going to be the most effective combo, right? If I attack with Whelming Gust Wave, I may hit and draw a card. I may be able to activate Katsu, but the next thing in line here is Megenchi for a 1 for 5, and all the same buffs that target Whelming Gust Wave can also target Megenchi Release. And we can end with a Lord of Wind. But if I have an empty graveyard, this Lord of Wind can only be 2 unless I spend those additional resources to buff it as well, like the Breaking Scales or an Ancestral Empowerment. So let's add Megenchi Release to the line. Now, Megenchi Release as combo to Katsu's specialization. It says if Whelming Gust Wave was the last attack this combat chain, Megenchi Release gains +1 attack, go again, and if this hits, search your deck for any number of cards named Lord of Wind, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So, as the defending player, you've tried to stop Katsu from getting to this point. And now now you're being threatened with a 5 power attack with Go Again, and if it hits, it's going to be worth a potential additional 8 or 9 damage, which, again, early game, nothing in graveyard. The Magenchi hitting for 5, while painful and has the ability to get Lord of Winds, will be more clunky to the Katsu player more than anything. Unless they want to do something crazy, like they could break Breeze Rider Boots and attack for 6 with 3 Lord of Winds, but that's, it's not what we were setting out to do with this combo line and how we get it set up. So this is late game. This becomes very dangerous. So if you have equipment or cards on hand, you have to know that all the things that could potentially buff Whelming Gust Wave can also potentially buff Magenchi Release. So you have to take into account what your opponent has done up until this point to understand how high it can get. Now, if they are empty and all they have is Breaking Scales, we know that the 5 attack is going to cap out at 6, especially if we have no resource, because we spent it on Magenchi Release because it costs 1. No resource floating, no card in hand. In decks where 3 blocks are plentiful, blocking 6 either with cards or equipment isn't that much of an issue, but aggressive decks, right, with a lot 2 blocks, this becomes a very big issue, because to fully block this with 2 blocks, you'll need 3 cards. So again, as the defending player, you have to weigh these different scenarios here. If I still have a resource and a card in hand, you have to respect the Razor Reflex, depending on what is happening with the graveyard. And if you feel like there's some real potential for Lord of Wind to come off, you might have to block for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But again, this is right. The traditional old-fashioned Katsu list is trying to get to this point, more or less. And you can do, as the defending player, you can do a lot. You can do yourself a pretty big favor in stopping that by effectively blocking early. The leg tap line, because this is right, old-fashioned Katsu also had this. Likely you'd have 3 red leg taps, 3 to 6 rising knee thrusts, red and possibly blue for pitch, and I like blackout kick for the art, but most of the time this ends up being a hurricane kick. If you look at the costs here, there's 1, there's 0, there's 1. All of them can be buffed with all the previous. So besides leg tap, which is not a combo card, so Breaking Scales can't give it +1. All the other ones that target just attack actions or ninja attack actions, these can be affected, and these can all be Razor Reflexed. But at the end of the day, this line is simply damage, right? There's no card draws on hits. There's not a lot of incentive for your opponent to block. I liked to run this because I considered this almost free damage, right? They're not necessarily, they're incentivized to block for the leg tap, in which case they can either block for right, so they can Razor it, they can't Breaking Scales it, they can do the other things. So at the most, between Razor and a +1, this would come in for +4, 8. But most of the time, you can get away with blocking between 4, 5, and 6 without feeling like you would be significantly punished if you were just to stop the Katsu trigger. So old-fashioned Katsu, with those 2 separate lines, sometimes more, has the real possibility of presenting some really awkward hands. Now, there's not a lot you can do with this. You can try to salvage something, 0 costs you can pitch to Kadachi, and you might do something like Kadachi, Magenchi for 4 on top of that. So you see where it is. You might get a card draw off of it so you can arsenal again, but not a lot that can come of a hand like this. And that is one of the big problems with how Katsu used to run. All right, we talked about what Katsu was. Let's talk about what Katsu is now. So what you're seeing here is the new additions to Outsiders, in addition to the original cards that we were talking about. And what this produces, you have a massive, sprawling, synergistic engine. And it's really become something to behold. Right, so let's talk new Katsu. So first things first, Surging Strike. We're running 6 copies of Surging Strike, 3 red, 3 yellow, just like before. We're also running 3 Be-like Waters, 0 for 3 with Go Again, and if they hit, you can pay 1, and if you do, you can make this into a Head Jab, Surging Strike, or Twin Twisters. Whelming Gustwave is back. Similar to the Surging Strikes, we're running 6 copies, 3 reds, 3 blues. Blues are for pitch, reds are for hits, but now we're running 3 red Descendant Gustwaves. Now, Descendant Gustwaves are 1 cost 3 attacks with Go Again, but if they combo with Surging Strike, it costs 1 less to go from 1 to 0 and gets +2 attack, 3 to 5. So chaining off a Surging Strike, Descendant Gustwave is a 0 for 5 attack, which is fantastic. So it does not have any kind of on hit like Whelming does for the draw. But we don't generally need that because of the other new piece. Next up in the line, Bonds of Ancestry. We run 4 copies, 3 reds and 1 yellow, and we could possibly even go more into the yellows, and some people like to run blues as well. Bonds of Ancestry is a 2 cost attack. That's important to remember because we know that it can't be Razor Reflexed, right? All the other ones that target just attack actions and possibly a pummel can target this, but being so late in the combat chain, it can only be buffed so much. But it does say that if a card with Gustwave in its name was the last attack on the combat chain, it costs 2 less to play and has Go Again, and when this attacks, you may banish a card with combo from your graveyard. If you do, search your deck for a card with the same name, banish it, then shuffle. You may play this combat chain. The big pickup on from Bonds of Ancestry here is the words, when this attacks. It does not have to hit in order to gain its effect. It simply can be played and be attacking for you to have that tutor effect. We are still running Magenchi Release. We talked about before. We're only running 2 copies, and some people take this even out of the main board these days and only run this in situations where fatigue is an issue. We're running the 3 Lord of Winds, the original end of the combo line. And we're running 3 Dishonor. Now, Dishonor was one of the first previewed cards from Outsiders in it, and it garnered a lot of excitement. It is a 0 cost, 3 block, majestic ninja attack with combo. Attacks for 2. It says combo. If Bonds of Ancestry was the last attack this combat chain, this gets +2 attack. When this hits a hero, if you control Surging Strike, Descendant Gustwave, and Bonds of Ancestry, that hero loses all abilities for the rest of the game. So what that means is that if Surging Strike, Descendant Gustwave, and Bonds of Ancestry are all, you've attacked with all 3 of them, and then you attack with Dishonor, it gets +2, and on hit, that hero loses all abilities for the rest of the game. So I want to talk about the decision points that come up and the synergies that I was talking about with this new combo engine here. So I've included Be-like Water because it's essentially Surging Strike 7, 8, and 9. You don't always get the hit, but this is a very good card to have and usually warrants a block from hand. Now we're showing both Descendant Gust Wave and Whelming Gust Wave because Bonds of Ancestry doesn't specify Descendant Gust Wave. It says if a card with Gust Wave in its name, which means it combos off of both Whelming and Descendant Gust Wave. A very important distinction. In addition, Dishonor's combo only checks for Bonds of Ancestry. It says if Bonds of Ancestry was the last attack this combat chain, this gets +2. I'm representing 2 Dishonors here because depending on the line that you choose, this Dishonor can still come in for +2 and attack for 4, but does not get the on hit of losing your hero abilities. That is specifically this line here. But the fact that you can easily switch between the two means that you have a lot more flexibility on what you can do and what you need to do with your turn in order to gain a lot of value out of it. So let's look at just Bonds of Ancestry right now. And we'll have these out to assume that we're comboing off a Descendant right now. So Bonds of Ancestry, when this attacks, you can banish a card with combo from your graveyard. If you do, search your deck for a card with the same name, banish it, then shuffle. You may play this card. If we attack with Bonds of Ancestry and it's comboed, we have a Dishonor in the graveyard, we can banish this Dishonor in order to find another one. We can banish it too, but just like Katsu's ability, you can play it from banish, and if you do, you're threatening 4 with the non-hit, a very devastating non-hit. So what does this mean for the defending player on how they block? If Surging Strike attacks, and in this example I've pitched another blue, floating 1. If Surging Strike attacks, the same principles apply as they did before. It can only be buffed by so much, and it's very dangerous if it hits. Blocking 6 becomes very important. Now, as the defending player, what happens next can make your life very complicated, and this is one of the reasons why Katsu is improved. Let's say that Descendant Gust Wave is next in line from Surging Strike, which means this is a 0 for 5. In this scenario, if there's still a card in hand, you have to ask yourself if this is a Bonds of Ancestry. Because if it is, and of course this is assuming that your hero cares about losing its ability, a Bonds of Ancestry can now fetch the Dishonor from graveyard. Right? Its effect can take place and find the Dishonor and play it out. So that is the full line. Now, if your hero cares about its hero ability, then you really have to play it by ear. But what that ends up meaning is that the Descendant Gust Wave for 5 will usually come in because that's not the decision point anymore. If you have the cards and you're relatively confident, right, that they don't have the bonds or a means to get it or a means to pump, then you can block the Descendant Gust Wave to prevent inactivation of Katsu. But as the defending player, if you are not overly confident in your ability to block the Descendant Gust Wave and stifle their turn, it's usually correct to let this hit and then see if they produce a Bonds of Ancestry. You know that if they produce a Bonds of Ancestry, the banish is on attack, so you'll know what they take. If they take Dishonor, depending on what you have in your hand, you're not going to waste the blocks on Bonds of Ancestry if that ensures that Dishonor will hit. So if you care about your hero ability, after you've blocked the Surging Strike, you see these guys, you know that Dishonor is coming. You're saving your remaining block for Dishonor and hoping that you have enough defense to counter any buffs that they might have. So obviously if they're empty, but they still have breaking skills, they can still be a 5 attack. But if they have a card in hand, depending on what you've seen, you have to respect Ancestral Empowerment, Art of War, Razor Reflex. As Katsu, if I get this off, this usually means 9-ish free damage coming through right here in the middle, as well as getting Katsu to hit. It also means that depending on what you have in hand as the defending player and what you know about what Katsu is trying to do right now, what else is dangerous about this line? That it doesn't have to be in this order in order for Dishonor to get the on hit. Now remember, the combo cares that Bonds of Ancestry is the card before it, but all this on hit cares about is whether or not all three are on the combat chain. So another reason why this deck is so much more consistent than it was. Whelming Gust Wave doesn't have Go Again naturally. Descendant Gust Wave does, which means that you can start with either a Surging Strike or a Descendant Gust Wave and still get a Bonds combo off, potentially into Dishonor. But it also means that if you have the means, you can change up the order and still get the on hit. So if you Descendant into Bonds and fetch Dishonor, and then attack with Surging Strike, it has Go Again, it's still on the combat chain. You can still follow up the Surging Strike with Dishonor. Now the combo doesn't apply, the +2, but you still get the on hit because Surging Strike, Descent, Gust Wave, and Bonds of Ancestry are all on the combat chain. That's also important because if there are more cards involved, they can still be added on to great effect. And you can still follow up with Dishonor, and as long as these three are still on the combat chain, no matter how far away Dishonor is from Bonds, you can still threaten the 2 damage with the on hit here. Right, we talked how this deck is now a sprawling engine of synergy. Let's take a look at what that means. Just about every card in this deck now has a role to play in the overall game plan of a Surging Strike line that ends with a Dishonor or something close to. So first we'll start with our Sacrificial Lamb cards. These are cards that are good in the deck, but they are your utility cards. They can be pitched, discarded, banished, whatever you need them to be at the time. And their versatility makes them very valuable additions. You have the old Standby Enlightened Strike. We run 3 of those. It's a 0 cost. If you needed to block, you can have a 2-card hand and attack for 7. But a lot of the time, this is either discarded to Katsu or banished from Art of War. And that is perfectly fine. Never be afraid to use this as a utility card. You can discard it, you can banish it, and don't have to feel bad. That is what it's there for. In addition to that, we're running 3 Soul Bead Strike Reds. These are ninja attacks, so Ancestral Empowerment can target them. There's conditional Go Again if it hits, but it is a 4-attack, 3-block ninja attack. If you blocked out big, you can still attack with a 4-attack breakpoint, which is good. But again, this is meant to be pitched to an Art of War or Razor, discarded to Katsu, or banished again to an Art of War. And very rarely it's attack. Usually this is a chain ender or something to force cards out of hand. And we're running 3 Double Strike. It was not high on Double Strike for a very long time since it came out. It was okay in Zoomerfy because the force multipliers allowed this to be essentially 8 value. If you buffed it +3 and attacked twice, you would get 4 and 4. So it was good in those situations, but outside of that, especially when Stubbies got banned, it is decidedly not the most powerful card in the world. But what I've discovered in my testing is that the threat of a Katsu and or Mass Trigger holds a lot more weight than it did previously because of the value of Bonds of Ancestry. Being able to combo Bonds of Ancestry and fetch something out of the graveyard, whether or not it's the Dishonor line, is basically the new function of this deck. So everything surrounding the major combo lines is a way to support either getting the combo or making the combo as effective as possible in that particular instance. So these 9 cards help facilitate those synergies by either being attacks when you need the beef, by being discard when you need the discard without losing a combo piece that you need, and banishing when you need a card banished. Especially double strike is a great banish target. Right, next up we have Flusterfist. Now we are running 5 total, 2 reds and 3 blues. Now, even more than Dishonor, Flusterfist is likely your primary target most of the time that you run bonds and are picking a card. The reds are there to be used as an attack. Now, they either have to be in the deck. The red Flusterfists are meant to be fetchable with bonds. So generally you want the reds to stay in. The blues are also very utilitarian. They can pitch. They're 0 cost blue, so they can pitch for Kodachis. You can discard them to Katsu, and that becomes doubly beneficial because if you discard a card to Katsu and find a bonds, if that's a blue Flusterfist and attack with bonds on combo, you can then banish that same blue card that you discarded moments ago and fetch a red from the deck. Now, following up with a red Flusterfist for 4 is going to be a very common scenario with your Bonds of Ancestry, especially while you're waiting for Dishonor to come. And because of that, Bonds of Ancestry ends up being essentially 0 for 8. So when you talk about value of a card, now ensuring Katsu's trigger with something like Double Strike, right, increases its value exponentially, where before it might threaten a mass draw, forcing your opponent to decide whether or not to block 1 damage twice simply to prevent the Katsu trigger is very nice. And I have found that they usually don't block with this, so there's almost a guaranteed Katsu trigger. This hitting is now worth roughly 8 damage, which is fantastic and why we run the double strikes now. Next up, we're running Spinning Wheel Kick. This is a new card from Outsiders. It is a 4 attack. It costs 1. It attacks for 4, blocks for 2. It combos with Twin Twisters or itself cards named Spinning Wheel Kick. It has natural go again. It potentially has combos with Be Like Water if it hits and you choose to change its name to Twin Twisters. But we've also found that in testing, because Descendant and Bonds of Ancestry cost 0 when comboed, if you pitch a blue to attack with Surging Strike, you usually have a resource left over. So if there's a Spinning Wheel Kick available to you, whether that's in your hand or in your graveyard, you can attack with bonds when it's comboing, and Spinning Wheel Kick is a perfectly fine target. That natural go again also helps with the consistency of the deck. We talked about before how sometimes the different card groupings made it very difficult to have a good turn. Spinning Wheel Kick says that even if you don't have the cards that you want, you can still have a good turn because it combos with itself and it has natural go again. I guess the older little brother of Spinning Wheel Kick, 100 Wins. We're running 3 reds in this deck. At one point we were running 9. 1 because I have all the extended art, so it's kind of a pet card. But the 100 Wins line was the easiest way to provide natural go again and those synergies. The yellows and blues from 100 Wins ended up being not still underwhelming. So and combine that with the fact that there were 2 blocks, they did not make this final iteration or this current iteration of Katsu that I'm on. 100 Wins serves all the purposes as well. So you're kind of seeing a theme here, like all these decks, all these cards are utility cards without combo, so they do a lot of things. They just don't combo with each other, which means you can't fetch them with bonds. But they have either conditional or guaranteed go again, depending on the mode. They're 0 cost, so they can be discarded or pitched if you need it in a pinch. 0 cost combo can can fill a lot of roles, can be discarded, can be pitched, can block. Spinning wheel kick is a 1 cost, so you can't Kadachi with it, but you can still pitch for Descendant Gust Wave and things like that. It combos, so it can be fetched. It can combo off of itself. 100 wins, 0 cost. It can be discarded to Katsu. It is also a good target for banish, and if you draw it, it's great to see just a 0 cost 3 with go again. So in addition to 100 wins, we have the Chain Ender, Winds of Eternity. Most of the time, this is it's just a blue 0 cost that blocks for 3, has combo. When you have 100 wins, it's nice to have the Winds of Eternity, but a lot of the times this is a block pitch discard. But you can see all of these have some role in the deck in order to capitalize on the effectiveness of Bonds of Ancestry or combo in general using Katsu. So we have all of those, and then we have the buffs. We run a single Razor Reflex. It turns out Razor Reflex is basically, I don't want to say power creeped out, but there's just not a lot of room, and there's so much natural go again right now in the deck that doesn't get all the value that it probably could. So it's nice to still have one, makes your opponent think about it, and you can still put it on top of a Kadachi super late to win the game. But it does have a purpose still, but you don't want to see a ton of them, so we run one. Ancestral Empowerment, on the other hand, is a crazy staple. You can discard it to Katsu, which happens more often than you might think, but obviously the +1 and the draw card are very, very important. Being able to utilize that for the buff is huge, right? This is one of the ones that can target Searching Strike, can target just about every card in the deck except for E-Strike as well, and that is an important consideration. Especially with the other support cards, right? Double Strike and Soul Bead are both ninja attacks. They can be targeted with Ancestral if needed. Last but not least, we are running 3 of Art of War. Now, Art of War actually was not great into Katsu before Outsiders, but as we laid out, there's a bunch of go again. There's a lot of attacks in here. There's a lot of consistency, and getting to that surging combo by any means necessary is pretty huge. Several times in testing, I have used the Art of War in reactions to bonds after I've gotten a dishonor, but before I've played it, to give my next attack go again. So the dishonor is going to come in for 4 go again, just to continue the chain. All these cards, again, they serve a very specific role, and they help with the synergies already in the deck to make them more powerful, with the ultimate goal of getting into that surging combo line. With all these additions from Outsiders and this increased consistency, you now have, as shown right here, 3 different ways that you can get a card in your hand that you didn't start with in any given turn. You can threaten a card draw from Mask Momentum. You can trigger Katsu. You can fetch with Bonds of Ancestry. If you achieve all 3 of these, you've now added 3 cards right to your board that you can likely chain together, which is also why I personally run Breeze Rider Boots. I think there might be room for Snapdragon Scalers in the sideboard to help with fatigue matchups. Specifically, Megenchi release Snapdragons into a Lord of Wind when you have a lot of blues in hand. The beauty of this deck, in my opinion, is that I think for the first time, everything in the deck has a role. So I've laid these out because they do have right? Very specific roles, and we can just run through basically what you can do with the cards and like my advice for when you have them. So we'll start with Surging Strike. Surging Strike, you're going to start your turn with it, either that or start a Kadachi into this. So if you have a blue that you can pitch it Kadachi into Surging Strike, depending on what other combo cards you have. If you're looking for the hit, you can expect to get Surging Strike blocked. So you either have an Ancestral Empowerment to give it +1, or you're just going to move on to the next thing, whether that is a natural extender, the Whelming, or the Descendant, or something else like a 100 Winds, or even an E-Strike or a Double Strike. The intent is, though, to get the combo going, and you're usually not firing off the Surging Strike without at least a Whelming and Descendant nearby, so that you can easily get the rest of it going. Because you want your opponent to make a poor decision, and one that's basically impossible for them to make a correct one. So if you have, if you're going to start surging, it's because you have, a very high probability of either connecting with a gust wave and being able to fetch bonds, or in fact having bonds naturally. If you have surging and none of these, you're likely, and none of its combo pieces for it, and just have these, you kind of have to play it by ear, but there's no shame in just attacking with your synergies and go agains, and then arsenaling Surging Strike. Similarly with Bonds of Ancestry, super early, you're likely not going to actually use Bonds of Ancestry in your combat chain, right? If it's turn 0 or 1 and you don't have anything in your graveyard, you can do, your surging line won't be as effective, like we talked about earlier with the Lord of Wind. Lord of Wind's line, right? If there's no legal targets in the graveyard, Lord of Wind's not very effective. Same thing with Bonds of Ancestry, right? Bonds of Ancestry will still be a 4 go again, which is good, but if it doesn't have a combo card in the graveyard to pull out, it's not going to be as good as it could be. So you really want to maximize the value from bonds. So I recommend that if you don't have a piece to pull out of the graveyard, that you do not attack with it and instead arsenal it and wait for a better turn for it. Megenshi Release, you can use it in one of two ways. You can arsenal this if you're in a grindy game and you're running something like Snapdragons, and you can attack with Megenshi Snapdragons and try to get the Lord of Wind combo off just on the 2-card shortcut. You can also just run the Surging, Whelming, Megenshi for the +1 attack value if it calls for it. Because we're not reliant on the Lord of Wind combo anymore, Megenshi can just be a 1 for 5 with go again, which is, a great rate, but no longer needs to, you no longer need to end with Lord of Wind in order to have like really great value from that. Moving on, Descendant Gust Wave. If you have a Surging Strike, Descendant Gust Wave is a 0 for 5. If you're playing it as a 0 for 5, the expectation is that you have bonds nearby. Again, if not, maybe you just have Surging and Descendant. That's still 10 on 2 cards for 2 resources. You're likely going to hit with a Descendant Gust Wave unless they're super fatiguey block heavy. But in which case, if you don't have bonds, you likely have one of these other cards, which you can then discard to Katsu and get bonds. You can Kadachi, Descendant, pitching a blue. It has go again. You can threaten a mass draw that way. You can start a combo with Descendant Gust Wave, knowing that is a 1 for 3 with natural go again. See where you can get. Maybe you have the bonds naturally, but if you don't, again, you have a synergistic pile of attacks here that you can continually just throw at your opponent because they all consist of Flusterfist. Flusterfist is your Bonds of Ancestry bread and butter. If this is in your hand, you can block with it and be fine. You can attack with it at the end of a chain and be fine. You can discard it to Katsu and be fine because it will go into your graveyard and be eligible to get, you can grab it with bonds. To get the most value out of it, if it's if it's in your deck, you can fetch it with bonds. If it's in your hand, using it. If you're trying to get offensive value, a 4 for 0 is great. But don't be afraid to discard it and put it in the graveyard so it can be bonds, or block with it again, put it in the graveyard. Whelming Gust Wave, I think is best used if you have Surging Strike early. I think it's best to get Whelming instead of Descendant because you'll threaten the card draw independently. I don't like to bonds this one unless there's a very specific situation that comes up where it's okay to do that. And usually that is a long Breeze Rider's turn in which I've already achieved most of the bonds combo, and I'm perhaps using the Whelming Gust Wave as just a 3 attack with no combo, like coming off of the bonds or even like Dishonor because it has go again because of the Breeze Rider to continue to extend a combat chain and maybe threaten a Magenchi on top of everything else, which isn't unheard of. But specifically, you usually like to pitch these in a crunch, but you are looking for Surging Strike into Whelming most of the time. Blue Flusterfists, pitch to Kadachi if you need to, but go ahead and block or discard to Katsu with those, because the blue Flusterfists are what you really want in your graveyard for bonds to get the red ones out of your deck and attack with them. Dishonor, obviously Dishonor is kind of like a win con in this deck, but you either need the combo in hand or you want this in the graveyard with bonds. So if you get this early, like turn 0, I usually will attack with it just to get it out there and put it into the graveyard. Again, because we do want like 1 copy in the graveyard, you can discard to Katsu, you can block with it, you can attack. I just wouldn't banish it, and you can pitch it, if you need to, if this is your only blue. Obviously you can pitch all the blues here. These just hold more value, I think, as cards on the board as opposed to simply resources. But obviously they're versatile and they're blue costs, they're blue 0 costs. So you can pitch to Kadachis. Never be afraid to just use the cards for what they're best used for. And so if you're going to pitch Dishonor to fuel your turn, that's okay. Starting up top, Spinning Wheel Kick. It's a 1 for 4 with go again and combo. We care about the fact that it's a 4 attack. We care that it costs 1. So if you pitch a blue, you can Kadachi, Spinning Wheel Kick, Threatening Mask with a breakpoint. Really great early to get into the graveyard, so that if you do draw bonds and you want to keep going and you have the resource, for instance, if you attack if you have a Surging Strike line and you pitch a blue, you're usually going to float 1 if you start with a Surging Strike. The Descendant and bonds line doesn't cost anything, so you'll have 1 resource left over. Spinning Wheel Kick is a great way to spend that extra resource so that you're using your resources as efficiently as possible. The fact that it has natural go again means that if you're threatening something like Mask of Momentum or have some other card draw to it, you don't have to worry about an on-hit. The on-hit Spinning Wheel Kick combos into itself, which is very nice, so that if you hit with Spinning Wheel Kick and want to activate Katsu, you can discard, maybe you can discard a blue Flusterfist and get a second Spinning Wheel Kick and have that come in for 5 with go again. With the on-hit, if it hits, you put it on the bottom of the deck, so you can keep reusing the Spinning Wheel Kick. Double Strike, Unconditional Go Again. This is a 0 cost. This is my favorite Art of War banish target, my favorite Katsu discard target, and it is a late game win con when you're grinding it out. Double Strike when your opponent at 1 is fantastic. But Double strike is the epitome of your utility infielder. It does everything. It's a little underwhelming on the damage side, but as we talked about, hitting and triggering Katsu in order to get to enable a Bond's turn is massive in its own right. But again, great pitch to pay for a 1 cost in a crunch. Great to discard a Katsu. Great to banish and not feel bad about. Enlightened Strike, 3 block. Great to discard a Katsu. It's actually likely one of its best, most common uses. I banish this with Art of War all the time because I want to play cards that cost 0 and can be played by themselves when I'm having like a huge turn. I do not want to have E-Strike force me to lose a card by tucking it in order to function. So if I have like an Art of War turn and it's going to be a big one, I'm usually going to banish or pitch the Enlightened Strike. It's a 0 and banish or pitch, or keep it in hand to discard a Katsu and let my other cards, my other attacks do the work. Alternatively, if I had to block and I have an E-Strike and another card, it's a great 2-card hand. Keeps you in the game. 100 wins, 0 for 3, go again, combos with itself like spinning wheel kick. It blocks for 2, but it does everything that you need it to do otherwise. Again, another synergistic piece. Right? Unconditional go again. You can discard it, you can pitch it, you can banish it, and you can do what you want with it. Be like water, 0 costs, go again, attacks for 3. Has an upside. If it hits, it can turn into Surging Strike or Twin Twisters, which combos off of Spinning Wheel Kick. But again, most of the time, this just puts a card in front of it. It's a ninja attack, so Ancestral Empowerment can target it. But it does, it does all the things that you needed to do. Does all the things you needed to do. Does all the things you needed to do. Does all the things you needed to do. Soulbead Strike is a 4 attack, so it's a breakpoint, 0 cost, it blocks for 3, it's a ninja attack. The go again is conditional, so if you have these, this is usually one of my first, these are one of the first ones that I look to discard or banish. Alternatively, this is a great 1-card hand as well, so if you had this in Arsenal or something, or you had to block with the rest of them, you can still attack for 4 and force either damage to leak through or multiple cards to block. You have your on the bottom here, you have your quintessential ninja blue pitches. These are often best used to pitch, and in a crunch, they can be used for other things. I think worst of all is attacking, but you can discard to Katsu. You can banish, but pitching for resource is going to be some of their most valuable things here. Whelming Gust Wave blue is a favorite of mine to discard to find red Whelming Gust Wave. Winds of Eternity combos with 100 winds, so if you attacked with 100 winds, it was able to either naturally have another 100 winds or draw into a Winds of Eternity. It turns into a 4 attack, which is great. But otherwise, right, we're pitching it because that's its best use. Late game defending as well. All these are obviously 3 blocks. Lord of Wind, right? We talked about how important Lord of Wind was. These days, it is, it's very much second fiddle, but it's important to have in the deck as a 3 block. It's a blue, it's a 0 cost. You can Kadachi it. It does have the ability to combo off Magenchi. It can help you fight fatigue. So if that's what you're doing, then it's important that you still play to that and not lose too many Lord of Winds so that you can still function. Up top here, we have our instants and reactions, our cheeky Razor Reflex. Oh, it's got a glare to it. one of Razor Reflex. As you can see, there's a lot of internal synergies here. If you find this early, you pitch it, pitch it to a spinning wheel kick, because it costs ones, but get that to the bottom. Obviously, you're gonna do a lot of shuffling, but you really want to see it late. You can arsenal this super late and fight for Kadachi lock. Um, it can also be the difference on it can give a Whelming Gust Wave go again. If it hits, it can give a Soul Bead the extra boost that it needs. Enlightened Strike, you can choose to buff or draw a card instead, knowing that you have this on the back end. That there's just so much go again that it doesn't get as much value as it used to, so we only run the one because it's nice to have, but we don't want too many of them. We have the Art of Wars. We're running 3. We just laid out all these synergies, all this consistent go again, all of this ability to synergize with one another and ensure that you have an effective wide turn, regardless if you have the exact combo or not. You throw in Art of War, and now everything gets buffed. Things that didn't have breakpoints have breakpoints. You get more cards in hand. You see more of your deck. You're able to do more things. And in this deck in particular, I think the variety of modes are all relevant. Blocking from Arsenal can save you. Giving Go Again is fantastic if you have already broken Breeze Rider boots, for instance. It is a 1 cost, so it is tough to pitch. But this is I think one of your top Arsenal targets, next to Bonds. Bonds and Art of War, I think, are 2 of the best Arsenal targets. Last but not least, you have Ancestral Empowerment. You can discard it to Katsu. You can draw, the ability to draw a card is super important if you need to play to your outs, and find the next card to do something on your turn. It obviously allows a combo card to get over the top by 1 if it's blocked exact. It can be pitched. It just can't really be effectively banished with Art of War. But we don't run, we run 7 non-attacks total here in our main board. But yeah, so that's kind of a quick rundown of the roles here, right? So, right, given how I just laid these out, I know that if I have a hand with one of these, it's likely going to be pitched. If I have one of these, I know I'm going to try and set up for a big combo turn, knowing that I want bonds. If I don't have one of these, I'm looking to see what I have here and how much go again, and how wide of a turn I can go. I'm looking to see if I can't block or attack with my Fluster Fists or Dishonors. So if I have them early, I know that I'm either going to play or block them to get them in the graveyard. And I am going to use these cards for whatever the best role in the moment is going to be. To make it kind of, I guess, simpler, I've pulled a couple of the cards from the main board because I'd likely take these out and replace them in certain circumstances. So we're going to pull these out and kind of have a shell. And right now that shell stands at 51 cards main. So we'll need to put in 9 cards in order to get to 60. So it depends on the circumstance, right? Command and Conquer is a really great card. This actually probably goes in a lot. Only comes out for, I imagine, just a couple matches. Like things like Riptide. I'd keep it in Oldham, but the matches where the arsenal isn't that important, but definitely it goes into Rangers, right? It goes into the Mirror, goes into Viscerai, right? Phi, Dorinthia, things like that. Defense reactions. Defense reactions, I get a little squeamish about because what I don't like to do is dilute the game plan of Katsu, right? More cards that don't synergize equal less opportunities to synergize, but some things are necessary evils. Flick Flack and Sink Below are here. I'm taking a page out of Simon Denning's book when talking about Flick Flack and Sink Below, and I agree with his philosophy, and I am using it. But basically, Azalea gets both of them. Lexi just gets Flick Flack. Azalea just has so many dominated attacks that you really want you want as much covered as possible. You want to get one arsenal and keep it there. Also against Guardians, obviously Oldham's LL'd, but Bravo's still a threat. Just the Flick Flack in Lexi because you still want to race, but Flick Flack allows for you to get 9 block value, right? Attack block for 4, and then 5 on the subsequent attack with 2 cards. May help you stay in the race, but adding the Sink Below's gonna dilute things a little bit too much. But because those go in, sometimes things come out. My first cards to come out, I would do is Double Strike. Right? If especially if you're concerned about not blocking, the 2 blocks, the 2 block with the least amount of power is going to be an easy candidate to come out. Art of War. I learned from my Phi days that Art of War should come out against Bravo. Decks that you really can't afford not to block or have the ability to block, the Art of War should come out. But it is mostly Guardians. Magenji typically would, I think, stay in for the most part, but some people like to pull it out and keep it for fatigue matchups, and I think that's fine. Razor Reflex can be pulled out because it's a cheeky one of. It can be pulled out in order to keep a clean 60 as you need to, but should probably go in for the aggressive matchups here. Kind of your aggro package and your defensive package, right? Your mid-range package here. But you don't have to hold the 60. You can mix and match a little bit as you see fit. Put the cards in that you want, that you think are best. Some other considerations. Reinforce the line. I think given the density of attacks, I think reinforce the line's perfectly fine. In addition to reinforce the line, yellow Flick Flack. In addition to the red, 1, 2, or 3 of those. You can expect to run like 3, reinforce the lines, but 1, 2, or 3 yellow Flick Flacks. 3 block is very relevant in today's meta, especially with all the Azuris running around. So having that at your disposal makes for some efficient blocking. And last but not least, visit the Floating Dojo. This is also something that could be considered as part of an anti-fatigue package, having the extra blues, but having the ability to put cards back into your deck at instant speed. I've been playing around with this. This is very close to actually being in the deck. As I've laid out here, I don't have a ton. I only run the reds of a lot of combo cards, which means that they can run out very easily. And there is a possibility on some of the longer games that my threat density is actually quite small, and I might lose some of those synergies that make it so effective. So being able to recycle some of those outside of the Lord of Wind it would be huge. The no block makes things a little more complicated. But I definitely could see running one or more of these, either main board um, or in the sideboard. I would say these are really meta dependent. You judge for yourself. You can also, some people don't like the Art of Wars, some people don't like Double Strike, so I could very easily take something like this out and put Flick Flack main board and have one of these in addition happening there. But yeah, so these are basically a maybe board, and you can have if you feel like they fit, then put them in. As you may or may not notice, I've changed my outfit since the intro. This has been a few days in the making. I've cut down probably 4 hours of footage into this, so I do apologize if it's one of the longer videos and you kind of lose yourself. It's okay. It's all right. But people tend to like these videos that I put out, so I like to throw it out every once in a while. Katsu is a long time favorite of mine. It's not the first time I've done a Katsu deck tech type video. I think this is the first time I've really broken down the nuances of how I believe Katsu to work. I am not an expert by any means. I have been doing this a while, so I like to think I know what I'm doing a little bit, but there's always greater minds out there. So by all means, give me your constructive criticism. I'm open to it, and I hope you enjoy this video. I'm Patrick Shaw. This is Off the Rails TCG. Be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell notification to get more videos like this and content like the Action Point podcast and the You Made Me Inc. podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Off the Rails TCG. You can find my personal at Pat Smash Good. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you later.